Hi, everyone, and welcome to a topic that we love talking about, and that is gaining the edge on your UT Austin application. Our team's been working with students applying to UT Austin for the last 16 years. The majority of them aren't auto admit kids, and they often are applying to competitive majors. We've loved the chance to work with so many Longhorns. Each year, two-thirds of the kids that we work with apply to the University of Texas. And while we can't tell you who will get in and who won't get in, we have a great feel for exactly how UT reads students and how a student can put themselves in a great situation to stand out from the stack. Now, today, I'm really lucky to be joined by two of my colleagues who are experts at working with kids on planning their activities and then communicating their story in all the materials that make up the UT application. Julie and Delara have worked with us for years, and each year they work with students who are applying to UT. They also work with younger students who are targeting UT. And today they're going to share their wisdom with you and dive into the strategies that students can use to really stand out from the stack at UT. Now, UT this year announced the most significant changes in 5 years, the most significant changes to their admissions requirements since the beginning of the pandemic. They announced it on March 11th, and the change in standardized tests got all the press. This is the headline on the UT admissions website, and it is a big shift. UT joined a number of other schools this year, many of the Ivies, a number of other schools who decided this was the year to shift back to requiring test scores. But that's really only a third of the story. The headline remains that UT is a school that focuses on fit to major, and the changes they made this year, including requiring standardized tests, all align with that fit to major approach to reviewing students' applications. Now, one of the reasons that this has taken place is that UT has seen a real explosion in the number of applications they received. The year before the pandemic, they received about 51,000 applications. Last year, 71,000 applications. They saw increases both for in state and out of state. Now, why has this happened? The first reason is test optional. UT prior to the pandemic required test scores. So you saw many students rule the school out based on the test score range for UT. The second thing is that the student population in the state of Texas has grown dramatically over the last 5 years. And then the final reason is that UT has really become a prestige school nationally. It's shifted from being a fantastic flagship public to what Forbes magazine recently called a public Ivy. Now, the impact of this application inflation can be seen in both the students who qualify for auto admit and the students who don't. Each year, 75% of the incoming class at UT comes from auto admit students, and they're guaranteed a seat in the College of Liberal Arts. But they are read competitively if they apply to impacted majors, and a little later we'll explain exactly what that means. The balance of Texas students and out-of-state students are not auto-admit kids. And again, as a sense of this, auto-admit is based on being in the top 6% of a public high school in the state of Texas. Last year, 11% of the students who were not auto admit received admissions to the University of Texas at Austin. And that really ranges across a whole host of majors. Computer science, a much lower admit rate for non auto admit students. UT also offers for non auto admit kids CAP options, which is the option for a student who was not offered admissions to Austin to go and spend a year at San Antonio or Arlington, have great grades, and transfer back into UT Austin. Now, we mentioned before highly selective majors, what UT calls impacted majors. These are schools where there's substantially more students applying to that major than UT has seats. UT Austin does not publish the admissions rate by major, but what we've seen is that majors like computer science, engineering, business, nursing, natural sciences, even a major like architecture, the competition for those majors is fierce. And the admissions rate is way below the overall admit rate for UT Austin. Now, the impact of test optional policies is what drove UT to shift back to requiring test scores. In an analysis that UT did last year, they discovered that 90% of all students who applied to UT Austin had taken a standardized test. They then analyzed students' performance who were offered admissions during the pandemic, and they saw that students who didn't submit test scores performed academically at a lower level than students who did. And then finally, UT didn't want to put students in the situation where they had to guess whether or not to submit scores. In addition to that, the other big change is that UT shifted a deadline that initially was November 1st for the last several years, what UT called a priority deadline, to an early action deadline, October 15th, which assures applicants that they will hear by January 15th. UT did retain their December 1st regular deadline, which ensures that students who apply will hear a decision by February 15th. Now, with all those changes, what we want to spend the rest of this webinar on is how students can craft and execute a successful UT admissions strategy. Julie, can you talk a little bit about what that successful admissions strategy looks like?
So when you look at the students we've worked with who are at UT or have been at UT, our strategy has really proved very distinctive. And at the core of that work, when they apply to UT Austin, is fit to major. So the students do all the work on that little wheel, and UT makes decisions based on a student's fit for their first choice major. So we help them make strategic decisions about each of these items as we work with them, based on the major they plan to choose at UT. Every part of this wheel has a job to do. A fit to major is at the foundation of the strategy. And this is often surprising to parents because many of us didn't know or didn't even need to know our major going into college. And what we mean by this is that the whole student's application fits the major. So the major they choose on their application directly impacts how their expanded resume is read, how their transcript is read, how their test scores are read, and their essays and recommendations. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about the foundation of this strategy, which is the all-important fit to major. So what does fit to major even mean? Well, it's how UT evaluates the application based on the student's first choice major. And for non-auto admit students, they are only looked at in relation to their first choice major, even though they're actually asked for a second choice major on the common application. We've actually noticed a few kids who are right on the cusp of that top 6% that sometimes get a second choice look at their second choice major, but it's highly unlikely. So think of this application like you're targeting everything in the application toward your first choice major. And as Bob was mentioning, some of these majors are more competitive than others, like computer science, engineering, business, the sciences, nursing. Those are all even more competitive. So this strategy becomes very important. So what is a strategy for fit to major? Some of you probably have 14, 15, 16-year-olds, and you're wondering how such young kids can possibly know what the heck they might want to major in. Of course they don't. It's a great question. So, how do you go about exploring fit to major in a developmentally appropriate way with a student? Because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about gaming the system or anything like that. If done right, exploring majors early on is actually a great exercise that is developmentally appropriate. So, ideally by sophomore year, it's great. It's a great time to start exploring interests in possible majors. Of course, if students are very motivated, freshman year is a great time to start. So, what does this look like? We encourage students to think about what they're most curious about, what classes, activities, and hobbies they've already gravitated toward naturally and really enjoyed in high school so far. And then think about what majors those activities might go along with. Parents are really needed in this process to help to facilitate this exploration. So, for example, I was working with a sophomore recently who loves art and storytelling. So, we started brainstorming summer activities by thinking about who he or his parents might know in creative jobs like marketing, advertising, animation, game development, so that he could possibly shadow somebody for a day or even half a day is fine this summer. And if he couldn't shadow someone, at least he could talk to them like in an informational interview. Those are great ways to find out more about a career. And for younger kids who are shy or hesitant to talk to adults about their jobs, I love to encourage families to do this together by inviting people over for dinner or meeting someone, a colleague or someone you know professionally out for lunch, and bring your student along, because this type of early exposure to jobs or types of jobs that they didn't even know existed can be really impactful for students in figuring out potential careers and majors they might like and ruling out those they're pretty sure they won't like. So, other opportunities, for example, we discussed to help him explore his interests, attending a summer program, which he's doing, getting a job, volunteering with an organization in a creative capacity. There's so many things he could have done. The activities we're talking about, though, for the fit to major are typically things outside the classroom. Because in our experience, for a strong UT application, a student really needs 3 to 4 substantial activities that show engagement in their major. And if they're applying to one of the impacted majors, their activities actually even really need to be even deeper. But the most important takeaway here is that waiting until the last minute to figure out what major you're choosing at UT isn't a good strategy for a successful UT application if your student is Longhorn or bust, because it's all about having the time for exploration and starting to get experiences to add to that all important expanded resume that Delara will talk about shortly. One thing to note is that when high school students and parents are surveyed about what's most important to them in a college they're choosing, the student's preparation for a career is the number one reason they choose their college. So UT is really tapping into that and saying, we want to make sure that they're prepared to thrive in their career when they graduate. So we want to ensure that they're fit to major, they fit the major they've identified. Okay, so here's a little case study for you to show what exactly this could look like. And we want to emphasize there's no one right way to show fit to major for any particular major. Okay, so this could look very different for different students. But in this particular case, the student took an online business course because he thought he might be interested in business. When we work with students, one of the things we do is some different assessments and activities to help uncover their aptitudes and their interests and motivations. And in this case, the student really loved and was good at math and scored very high in the enterprising area. So business was a logical place to start exploring. There's so many free and low cost courses online through providers like Coursera and edX, if they're not offered at a student's high school. So this is a great, easy way to test the hypothesis that I might be interested in business. So once the student took the course, he really enjoyed it and confirmed his interest. And now that he had some early exposure, he was ready to do some further exploration. So he talked to his parents, and they knew some people who were in careers related to business. And for example, one of his dad's friends ran a restaurant, and another friend's mom worked in HR. So he talked to both of those people about their jobs, about what they do, how they got there, what they like and don't like. And after talking to his friend's parents, he learned about how businesses use marketing and he became more interested in that. So he explored marketing in a focused program on a college campus during the summer and walked away with some specific skills in marketing, which we know is something that colleges are increasingly looking for. And then he came back even more interested in business and joined the business club at school and was inspired to learn screen printing and start his own t-shirt business because he also loved to draw. So he brought in that interest. He made a budget. It was a real business and everything. And he had a great time doing that. And then after his junior year, through friends and family connections, he found an internship. And by internship in high school, I really mean a glorified shadowing opportunity. This is not like a full-time paid internship like you might have in college. Typically, this is like 10 to 15 hours a week, maybe some administrative work, shadowing meetings, getting some professional exposure, and seeing how problems are solved and just watching stuff. So all of these things became the story that was reflected on this student's resume. You could really see how his path of curiosity developed over each activity. Now, another student may have gone about this in a completely different way, but for this student, it really showed his fit for the business major. Okay, so this next case study is really interesting because it really shows how when a student explores, even if they change their mind, they really can't lose. So that's great information to find out what you don't like and what you do like. And that's what happened to this student. And it happens to a lot of students who show an early aptitude for math and they take high-level math courses and love it. And everyone says, oh, you're going to be an engineer. And that's what happened to this student. So she talked to several people in engineering careers early on. So for example, her dad's sister was an engineer at Boeing. And she talked to her and learned what she did all day, and it seemed kind of interesting. And then through that informational interview, she got a connection that led to a shadowing opportunity at a civil engineering firm. And she did that and she hated it. She found it boring. She saw everyone sitting behind their computers and it didn't seem like any way she wanted to apply her love for math. But even though she didn't discover her dream jobs, she built those skills. She got out of her comfort zone. She was in the professional world. She developed some confidence. And that gave her the confidence to voice that she didn't think engineering was for her. And she wanted to explore other ways to share her love of math and to investigate it. So then she discovered finance while doing a project for a class where she had to use Excel. And her dad taught her some tricks and shortcuts, and she immediately loved Excel and was like, wait, this is what I can do with math. So she talked to some people who were in the financial industry and identified that this was a way she could apply the skills she had already developed, develop more skills, and have tons of options as a career. Versus with engineering, she thought she'd have too much of a predefined role. But with finance, she discovered that the possibilities were more endless. So then she shadowed an aunt who was a CPA during tax season and helped with some administrative tasks. She really liked it. And she got connected with another CPA who invited her to do an accounting internship. So all these activities really built on each other. Then what I love is she used the skills she had gained in all these experiences and applied them in her own environment. So her class was going on a big field trip and she volunteered to be the treasurer and make a spreadsheet and track all the expenses. Then she went to her Girl Scout troop and volunteered to be the treasurer there. So you can see that with this example, you don't have to know what you want to be as a 10th grader, but it sure is great to explore early because then she didn't end up as a sophomore engineering major needing to transfer to a different major because she had already figured out engineering was not for her. So by exploring early, this really allows students to show not just interest and involvement, but also initiative and ultimately impact. And both of these stories are great examples of this trajectory. In the beginning, these students were just exploring and getting involved, but our hope is that something sparks in them and then it gets them moving and makes them more motivated to take more initiative and have a bigger impact. And that's what really shines on that expanded resume.
All right, so one of the items students are going to need to prepare for their UT Austin application that's pretty distinctive to UT is the expanded resume. The expanded resume, according to UT, is technically optional, but what we've learned across all of college admissions and in our work with students is that optional never means optional. And in fact, the expanded resume has really become an essential piece of a student's application strategy, especially in regards to fit to major. In fact, the resume can often be an element that really moves the needle for students in their application read. And the UT resume, this expanded resume, is completely different from a traditional job seeking resume. I think it's often more effective to think of the UT resume as less of a resume and more of an inventory. It's an organized repository of all of the experiences a student has had, primarily outside of the classroom, but sometimes within the classroom as well, depending on the context. And when you include all of the information about a student's engagements in the resume document, it can usually hit 3 to 4 pages. For especially engaged or busy students, I've seen expanded resumes hit up to 6 to 7 pages. According to UT, the resume should include details about each activity and what it involved rather than a general description or summary of that activity. You should also include the time commitment within each activity, so the hours per week and the weeks per year spent on each activity. When preparing an expanded resume, there usually is some strategy involved. I recommend my students start by listing out everything that has captured their time and attention over the course of high school, starting from the summer before 9th grade up until the day they graduate from high school. So there is a little bit of projecting into the future that you can do on your expanded resume, especially if a student has commitments or activities lined up in their second semester of their senior year. We can put those on the expanded resume. When it comes to making this entire list, I recommend really thinking broadly about activities, which can range the traditional, like jobs, athletics, camps, volunteering, but I also think there is plenty of space on the resume to include hobbies, independent projects, and family responsibilities. It's valuable to list out non-traditional activities like, for example, I had a student a few years ago who loves taking apart computers, and he ended up majoring in engineering because he wanted to work in computer hardware. Last year, I had a student who jerry-rigged a golf cart that he found in his garage because he wanted to see if he could make it run on electricity. He was applying for electrical engineering. Basically, if you or your student are wondering, does this thing they've done, does this random thing they've done count for the resume? The answer is it usually does, so put it on there. In addition to supplying dates, titles, and a description of the activity, your student should think deeply about their particular experience within it. What impact did this activity have on them? How do they feel they impacted others by virtue of being in this activity? So for example, if we have an entry on the resume about being on the dance team, some impacts could include introducing new choreography to the team and teaching it to their teammates, bringing in new guest choreographers to kind of step up their choreography game, introducing new traditions and increasing team morale. Or it could be something less formal, like inviting new members onto the team, or mentoring or assisting underclassmen. When we get into providing details of the resume, what we're really looking for is how the student has taken initiative within their activities and the impact that they've made on themselves and others. All right, so this is an example of a pre-med or nursing resume. And because of UT's emphasis on fit to major, we really recommend organizing the expanded resume to reflect their intended major, their intended first choice major. So this is, not really intuitive. It's the opposite of what you would do on a traditional resume, but that's really what UT is expecting. So highlight those fit to major experiences right on the resume, as you can see on this example. What this resume organization strategy is really doing is highlighting not only, the medical experiences the student has, but also highlighting the kind of caring aspect that the student has imbued into these activities. Nursing and medicine are very care-oriented professions, and that's something that readers are looking for in the students who pursue these areas of academic interest. This engineering resume follows a similar strategy of mapping out and leading with STEM experiences. You'll also notice that we have a project section here that focuses on the work that was accomplished in the classroom. This can be especially helpful to include on a resume, especially for students who attend a pre-professionally oriented or technically focused high school that has a pretty full slate of elective offerings. There's a particular high school in Central Texas that we work with pretty frequently that offers an engineering class that certifies their students in CAD and 3D modeling, which, despite happening in the classroom, is a very impressive resume piece, is an excellent example of fit to major. But if you just looked on that student's transcript, all you would see would be a class called Introduction to Engineering. So the resume really becomes a place to dig deeply into things you do that aren't readily accessible just by looking at the transcript, to really kind of dive deeply into the courses you've taken and the things you've learned about them as they correspond to your major. Julie, do you want to share a little bit about transcripts as part of your UT strategy?
I sure do. All right, so let's talk about transcripts. Transcripts, of course, are just a compilation of your classes and grades. Now, obviously, UT is a very competitive school, so they're looking for rigor, especially in those courses related to a student's major, because fit to major, right? And by rigor, what I mean is AP, IB courses, preferably over dual credit or on-ramps courses. UT prefers AP or IB. So what they look at is, when you had a choice of a course to take, did you choose to take the higher level course, like the AP or IB course? In terms of strategy, students really want rigor at the very least in the areas related to their major. They want to make class choices related to the major as well in their electives, because while great UT applicants almost always have those strong expanded resumes that Delara was just talking about, it's really hard to get there on the basis of academics alone, but academics really are the foundation of the application. So enhancing your application by choosing rigor in classes related to your major, these things really play together with all the other things on the wheel, like we showed you earlier. Okay, so test scores. So as Bob was saying, test scores are required again. Now, what we know historically is that test scores at UT were a part of the admission process, but they were just part of holistic admissions, right? We don't know for sure, but we can make a pretty good educated guess that the median score at UT right now is about a 32, because they were test optional for several years. Historically, you did not have to have a 32 to get into UT. The median score is inflated right now because during those test optional years, of course, only students with very strong scores sent them, which caused the median score to rise. So again, what you need and which scores matter are very much related to your major. So let's talk about strategy for test scores. So UT looks at the student's major and then looks at the part of the score that relates to that major to evaluate the student. So for example, students in STEM majors and business are looked at related to the math score. That's the driver. For students in other majors like English or communications, they're looking at more like your reading and writing sections. So as we look at that wheel, remember that wheel with fit to major at the center, everything is major dependent. All roads lead back to the major. And of course, that's not a decision you want to make in July of your junior year when you are, you don't want to sort of have your testing plan just then, right? You want to think ahead. So typically, we like to have our sophomores have a testing plan in place by the end of their sophomore year so that they know for junior year when they're going to take their tests. Most of our students actually take their tests in the spring of their junior year. But those who have enough math under their belt sometimes want to get it out of the way in their the summer before their junior year, or even in their fall, of course, depending on their extracurricular activity schedule.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the essays that are required to apply to UT and how to approach them. So in addition to announcing the return to standardized testing, in March, UT announced that they've modified the prompts for their essays, including their long essay. The essay, also known as the personal statement, formally asks students to, quote, tell us your story. What unique opportunities or experiences have you had in high school that made you who you are today? The revised prompt asks students to share an essay on any topic of your choice. So while in the past, we have had students recycle their common application essay for UT, by updating their prompt, they've made the allowance for reusing your common application essay a little bit clearer. So students don't feel the pressure of having to write a fresh personal statement for UT, and to ensure that it fits the prompt UT is asking for. In another change of course, UT also announced that instead of their usual 3 short answer essays, they are now only asking for 2. There's the existing major essay, which asks students to reflect on their first choice major, and the new prompt, which asks students to share about an activity that they're proud of. Despite writing 1 fewer essay for UT this year, students should still think about their strategy before putting words on the page. Before drafting, I always recommend having my students sit down with all 3 essay prompts, their personal statement prompt, and the 2 short essays, and really map out what they plan to share about themselves in each piece of writing to ensure that they're providing a holistic overview of themselves and their strengths to UT. As always, the personal statement requires extensive reflection and should serve as a way of inviting readers into their world. For the major essay, which is probably one of the most important pieces of your UT application, your student should really focus on how they've cultivated their interest in their first choice major. We always recommend starting these essays early, especially the brainstorming process. Try and get that started in June, especially now that UT has moved up their early deadline to October. I want to take a few moments to speak more specifically on how your student can use their essays within their UT suite of writing to really shine and show their strengths and their uniqueness. Let's start with the personal statement. The revised prompt for the personal statement is share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written, one that responds to a different prompt, or one of your own design in 500 to 650 words. You'll notice this is very similar to the final prompt in the Common Application selection of prompts. And students should really use this essay as a chance to set themselves apart, to offer information and stories about themselves that will not be available just by looking elsewhere in their application. It should be in story form, not analytical. It shouldn't be a summary, and it shouldn't focus on just the highlight reels of a student's life. Your student should not be focused on telling the entire story of their life either. That's not appropriate for this kind of essay, and you can't do justice to 17 years of living with such a small word count. Instead, these are some of the things your students should focus on. They should focus on sharing about themselves, something that is key to who they are beyond their resume and their transcript. They might consider their hobbies, their personal values, a particularly valuable learning experience or growth moment that they've underwent. Traditionally, I've also had students want to write about activities that were particularly meaningful to them. This is another strategy a student can take, but I encourage them to be mindful because they will have to write an activity essay as part of their short answer responses. So we want to make sure that there isn't too much overlap. Now let's talk a little bit about UT's short answer supplements. These are 250 to 300 words, and students should take a significantly more straightforward approach when answering these questions. Given the limited word count, students shouldn't waste any time with creative flourishes or metaphors or anything like that, and instead should answer the questions directly with evidence from their experiences. In addition to sharing about themselves, students should also devote time in each of these short answers to imagining how they will integrate themselves into the UT academic and social community. It's important to know UT well when writing these responses. Before beginning drafting any of these essays, I always recommend students think about the essays as a whole and ensure that you are pulling from distinct experiences from your life without overlap. I like to describe the UT suite of essays to my students as a photo album of who you are and how you've experienced high school. Every photo, or in this case, every essay, should be offering up a new angle, a new piece of scenery, a new experience, all while showcasing you in a positive light. By the time your admissions reader makes it through your photo album of essays, they should have a fuller understanding of who you are and what you can bring to the university. And as with all things UT, I always recommend keeping your first choice major in mind in your short answer essays, because every part of your UT application comes with an opportunity to highlight fit to major. Let's dive into the prompts of these two short answer essays. The first is the major essay, which asks, why are you interested in the major you've indicated as your first choice major? This essay, these 300 words, are the primary area students should take advantage of to make a case for their first choice major. When writing this essay, I always recommend students start off straightforwardly by stating their first choice major. So for example, I want to major in chemistry at UT Austin. I want to major in business at UT Austin. From there, you should think of the top 3 experiences you've had in high school that relate to your major and tell the story of how that interest in your major formed over time. Some areas to consider as evidence in this essay could be your coursework, your in and out of the classroom experiences, jobs or internships, online classes. The second half of this essay should be focused on how you plan to take advantage of the resources available within your major at UT in particular. In short, why do you want to study chemistry at UT specifically? This involves extensive research. I always recommend my students spend a minimum of a few hours learning everything they can about their major at UT. They should look over course catalogs and course descriptions, review faculty research opportunities, student research opportunities, organizations, special features within that major, and list out how you imagine yourself taking advantage of these things. For the activity essay, I recommend, let's start with the prompt. Think of all of the activities, both inside and outside of school, that you've been involved with during high school. Which one are you most proud of and why? UT also includes some guidance on how to think of an activity. It encourages students to really think about activities broadly to include things like jobs or family responsibilities. The key with this essay isn't necessarily the activity itself, but rather why you're proud of that activity. This essay is inviting students to reflect on their experiences and how they've shaped your student. Like with the expanded resume, UT isn't interested in a summary of the activity, but rather how it's impacted them and the people around them. So when answering this question, I recommend students start with a list of how the particular activity they've chosen to write about shaped them. Did you learn a new skill? Did you benefit a community? Did you learn something about yourself that you didn't know before? Use those reasons to guide your answer. And like in your major essay, spend a few sentences imagining how you will continue not just your particular activity, but the impact that that activity has had at UT through clubs, research organizations, and in the classroom. Julie, do you want to tell us a little bit about letters of recommendation?
Yeah, thanks, Delara. So let's talk a little bit about strategy of letters of recommendation at UT. So of course, letters of recommendation are always asked for in college admissions. Well, not always, but mostly. Um, and most of all, you're asked to send teacher recommendations. In the past, UT has informally encouraged students to send non-teacher recommendations, but now, as part of their recent changes, they are explicitly saying that that's what they prefer. So they want a recommendation that showcases your students' achievements and interests as it relates to their major. And the best ones come from one of their activities that relates to one of their majors, someone outside of the classroom. So, of course, could you use someone at school? Yes. If you can't find someone outside the classroom, you can absolutely use a teacher, or you could use someone like from a faculty sponsor of a club, for example. So let's say you're part of the Spanish club and you're planning to be an international relations major, then that person would be great. We have seen non-teacher recommendations, though, really have more sway at UT. There's a little more work for students because they have to kind of go outside the system. The application system at their school is kind of set up for teachers. So it's a little bit more work, but it's really worth paying attention to this and doing some extra work to make this happen. Because going back to that all important wheel with fit to major at the beginning, at the middle, you don't want to leave any stone unturned if you're really dying to be a Longhorn, right? It's worth taking the time to do every one of these pieces. And this is kind of an easy one to just forget or kind of leave to the last minute. But I encourage you, when you start early, you can really think about, as you do these experiences related to your potential major, you'll want to see if there's someone who would be willing to write a letter of recommendation after you do the activity. So strategy-wise, making a tight application where you can see the connected story arcs is so important. Many times people ask us if the UT application readers really read all of the stuff on this wheel. And you know what? Yes, they really do. Of course, do they miss great students sometimes? Of course, it's a huge school. But what we see is that you can definitely tell by a resume their likelihood of being well considered as long as they have the grades and other parts of the application, including recommendations, being equally strong. So you really want to make sure that you're asking adults who can highlight the specific experiences they've had that relate to the major, and those skills and impact they've had that relate to what they plan to major in, and connect them directly to what's on the resume.
Now, one of the things that we always hear from families is, what about if my student is just starting high school or they're in 10th grade? What should they be doing to make sure they're on track to be strongly considered at the University of Texas? So let's start with ninth graders. Academics are obviously the number one priority. It takes some time to get oriented to high school, to time management, study skills. Nothing is more important than that. But once a student has established that base, we encourage them to look at their interests, their aptitudes, to really see what are they great at and what motivates them, and to start being more involved, to experiment. Oftentimes, that's an opportunity to go beyond their comfort zone into something that's new for them. If a student is targeting a competitive major, we strongly encourage them to start in ninth grade and to consider opportunities for initiative. Computer science is a great example here. Students who enter high school with a clear intention to be a computer science major at UT Austin really have the opportunity to step in and learn new programming languages, take on projects, being involved in efforts that clearly begin to communicate their interest and their involvement in computer science. Now, for 10th graders, again, academics continue to be the number one priority. As Julie pointed out, that transcript is so critical at UT, both in terms of rigor, but also in terms of fit to major. That being said, many of the students that we work with who thrive in their journey to UT take advantage of 10th grade to really step up their engagement, to really signal that they're taking initiative. It might be leadership skills, both informally and formally, but it also might be opportunities in their community and opportunities online or informally to really build on their interest in their intended major. We also see for the majority of our 10th graders that they carve out at least a week in the summer between 10th and 11th grade for some activity key to their anticipated major. This can be the kind of pre-college programs that some families are aware of, but it can just as easily be a free activity where the student really has the chance, oftentimes that they don't have during the school year, to dig in and really understand a major. Now, what is a slide about Texas A&M University doing at the end of a webinar about the University of Texas at Austin? Each year, about half of the students that we work with who apply to UT also apply to A&M, two very different schools. They share some things in terms of auto admit and a focus on fit to major. On July 10th, we'll be hosting a webinar to dive into how students can thrive in the admissions process at at A&M. And in our follow-up note, we'll share the registration information for that webinar. We appreciate you spending time with us. We love diving deep into how students can thrive in the admissions process at UT and at A&M. Please let us know if you have any questions, and we wish you and your students great success.